going on, everybody? It is Tuesday, March 28th, and the markets were down a little bit today, but I want to talk about yesterday's interview I had with Fox Business. I got a lot of really nice compliments from all of you, and by the way, I'm very pleased to see this because, and I've mentioned this in the past, that this is a 180-degree turn from when I used to do these videos and was attacked ferociously for talking about MMT, and Charles Payne and I started together as contributors to Fox News before they even had Fox Business. I mean, we started back in, I believe it was 2000 or 2001. But he stayed on and he became, he's got his own show. But for whatever the reason, and I knew I was going to get ambushed a little bit, the way they set these things up, because originally I sent them an email. I think I sent Charles a Twitter message just saying, hey man, I'd like to come on and talk about MMT. I think it's really being misrepresented and it could be a good discussion. And he was like, yeah, great to hear from you, Mike. We'll have you back on. I didn't know, or I didn't remember from the old days that, they're going to set it up as some kind of debate. But Joe Livornia, he was a pretty good co-panelist, I have to say. He went along with a lot of the things I was talking about. There were some things, were the classic kind of neoliberal stuff like, hey, you want to make education better, just, cut the teachers' pay and go to charter schools, and basically you're getting the same teachers, you're getting the private sector provisioning these schools. It's kind of a scam where, they funnel public funds to these charter schools that are mainly run by wealthy organizations or individuals. But anyway, I don't want to get into that. A lot of you felt sorry for me because you saw the clear editorial opposition to MMT and the way it was really frivolously described by Charles as, hey, let's just get some free money and everybody's going to feel great. And this is the thing about the critics of MMT, that the arguments are complete straw man arguments. They just set them up and knock them down, and they have no validity whatsoever. And most of the time, they say things that the MMT academic community never says. I mean, and I made that very clear at the opening when I said, look, when the whole lead into the conversation was, hey, you want free money or you want the free market? And we never said anything was free, the MMT people. We say there's a cost to everything, but the cost we see is in real terms. That means the real assets. That means things like food and housing and clothing and productive capacity and labor and resources and maybe the environment or fresh water, things like that. And I said those things are finite and those are real constraints. Doesn't matter how much money. And I said the money really exists as electronic bookkeeping entries on the books of the Federal Reserve. The Federal Reserve is the bank of the U.S. government. Congress decides every year how much it's going to spend, and then it tells the Fed to pay this person or pay this company or whatever, and that's the way it's done. And I, gave the example, which I've used here many times. I said, look, Biden just did an $890 billion increase in the defense budget. Nobody asked where the money's coming from. You need $14 billion for a new aircraft carrier. Boom, you got that money, no problem. Nobody asks where it's coming from. It's only for social causes, and not just social causes. I mean, we had the whole thing with infrastructure, with the environment. I mean, those were very hard things to pass, and they didn't pass in their totality. Some of it is happening, but still we need a lot of that. But it's this narrative, it's this mythology about somehow money running out, that money is some kind of a finite unit. Now again, I understand that under a gold standard or under a fixed exchange rate, like maybe we had, in the 1930s or prior to that, that is a concern. I mean, banks could run out of the backing they needed to create money through loans. And I made the distinction between credit and actual money. I don't know if I did it on the show, I don't remember, but I've made that distinction here that, credit is basically a zero-sum game. It's not even a zero-sum game. I mean, it's really a net transfer to the credit institutions. When you get a credit, you get a deposit in your checking account, but at the same time, you get an offsetting liability, which is a loan or a credit that you have to pay back with interest. So it's an income transfer from the borrowers to the creditors, and the creditors they happen to be financial institutions. But you could see throughout the thread of the conversation how it was kind of leaning pretty openly. And I think many of you got it. You made comments about it, how the conversation was trying to delegitimize MMT, the way it's captioned, the way it was referred to as, free money. It was like it's a demeaning way to say it. It's not just demeaning, it's unintelligent. And it's unintelligent on purpose, I believe. I do think that these people, Joe Livornia did understand. I even think that Charles Payne, and he was never like a big proponent of this, I think he understood, but he understood from the standpoint of, let's make the poor people happy. It's time for them to get happy. It's not so much about them getting happy. It's about producing a society that has the resources and the standard of living that rises up to its capability, and not constrained by basically an arbitrary, construct that we call money, that we believe that we could run out of. I mean, that just cannot happen. Now, there is a consequence if the guy, and I tried to mention this yesterday, and I don't know if you caught it, but Charles Payne went on to say that, the government spent trillions and trillions, and now look what we have. We have inflation, and it was all Biden's fault. Trump was spending it too, but I said, hey, you forgot one piece of the puzzle. And that piece of the puzzle was the fact that we had a record contraction in economic output because of COVID, and everything was shut down globally. I mean, you had a global shutdown in the supply chain, in manufacturing and production capacity and labor. I mean, that was a massive, massive hit to the system, almost if not unprecedented. And then that was followed up by the sanctions on Russia and other countries as the war broke out last end of February 2022. So we've had both political conditions and the pandemic that were unique in the sense that they created an environment where, yes, it was the right thing to continue to maintain income standards or levels of incomes that people were able to live and survive. And also, same thing goes for businesses with those PPP loans that allowed businesses to hang on to workers and not create some kind of a mass. Don't forget, like that contraction, that was like a 30% contraction in GDP. We've never seen something like that before, maybe in the Great Depression. And the rebound from that as the fiscal stimulus took hold in 2001 or late 2020, I'm sorry, 2021 or 2020, was like a gigantic increase as things started to come back online and production capacity started to slowly ramp up back up again. But you could see how obvious it is, the editorial line of a place like Fox. I told you stories. I've given you guys stories about my time at Fox News. I was over there for over 10 years as a contributor. It's a story that I've told many times about how we'd have segments, and we would often be given the topics that we would be discussing. And on those topics, sometimes they'd have some economic data. That's what I do. That's my thing. And I would say to the producers, like, you have this wrong. This is completely wrong. This is not what's happening. In fact, the opposite is what's going on than what you're trying to say. And they would basically come back to me and say, don't worry about it. This is the way we want to say it. And the reason I mention that is just to advise you or recommend that you source other resources of information beyond the mainstream economic press, because they have an agenda of seeing things that is out of paradigm with the reality of what is going on. They have been warped by monetarism, which we have seen is not only a sickness and a psychosis, but it's a policy path that often leads to the reverse results of what the central banks are trying to do. I mean, it's funny because you look at inflation right now, which has not come down very much, but how could it? I mean, we've had the Fed go from a 0% interest rate to a 5% interest rate. And those increases in interest rates, I mean, they are reflected in the cost of all goods and services, in credit cards, in mortgage loans, in automobile loans, in consumer loans, in all kinds of things, in corporate and industrial loans. So, like, that's all factored into the final cost of product. And as interest rates go up, banks charge higher money because they're in there to make a profit, so they have to charge higher money, and it just raises the price across the board. And yet you see this, these academic, geniuses sitting there scratching their heads, wondering like, hey, how come higher interest rates? And I've said this before, if that was the remedy, then you'd see countries like Argentina and Turkey with the lowest inflation rates in the world. And vice versa, you'd see a country like Japan with the highest inflation rate in the world. It just doesn't work that way. But you have to understand that when it comes to the mainstream media, of which Fox is absolutely 100% part of, it might be different oriented politically than some of the other mainstream media outlets like MSNBC or CNN or CNBC or something like that. But they're businesses, and the goal is to attract viewership. Fox has a very high viewership, but I think the demographics is really, really old. I'm not sure, but I read something. It was something like 65 to 80 years old or something like that. I know Charles. I know Charles a long time. I think he's a good guy. But I have personally, I have never been one to play along with, the status quo, so to speak, or the corporate line. I mean, I speak my mind. in that sense, it may have limited or had limited my ability for advancement within Fox News. But at the time I left, I was happy to leave, and I left because, I got tired of arguing on these panels with people who were outside the realm of experience when it came to economics, outside the realm of understanding, and basically spouting nonsense. And somebody said to me in a comment today, Mike, you did a great job, and kudos to you, and appreciate a lot what you did, but it was very obvious from the interview that MMT still has a long way to go to gain any big traction or following. Don't forget, on Friday, I'm going to have Randy Ray on a podcast, and that ought to be great. Randy Ray, one of the founders of MMT, brilliant guy, great guy to talk to, really nice guy. He knows it in and out. He's on the level of Warren Mosler. In fact, Mosler, I think, was the one who got him to initially write the money, write the book. I forget the name of it, but I'll pop it up here on the screen. But that was back in the mid-90s, and that got the whole thing going on MMT. So it's going to have great for Randy to come on the show. But I hope you guys enjoyed the appearance. We didn't have a lot of time to really get into these things deeply, like Joe Livornia was starting to talk about, the bond vigilantes in the UK. And I mean, one of the reasons why we saw what happened there was that basically the central banks stepped back from providing liquidity to the banking system, which is, that's part of their function. So, I mean, if you're not going to do your job as you were intended to do, if you're going to abrogate your responsibility, if you're just going to say, well, we're not here anymore. And I've said this about the Fed too, like if Powell just follows the market, whatever the market says, then there's basically no reason for a central bank. And if he starts enacting policies, if the Fed enact policies that, one policy contradicts the other policy to the point that they have to create a new vehicle or a new set of policies to offset the other two that are in contradiction to each other, then the system becomes like a crazy Rube Goldberg system that it just, it's unstable. It's unstable. So anyway, let me finish off just by saying fiscal flows are strong, but we are coming to the April tax drain period. It should be very interesting to see what happens. I've been talking about this since, last December. I said February 15th was going to be the peak in fiscal flows, and we were going to see a slowdown. That's exactly what happened. Then we're going to have 2 tax drains, one in March, which actually ended up to be very little. But the big one coming up in April, the only thing I would have to say now, and I've been saying this, is that the Fed's policy has moved more towards a neutral policy for the next 2 meetings. And then the markets are pricing in 4 quarters of rate cuts through the end of the year. So that ought to be interesting. But other than that, for me, as long as those flows remain the way they are right now, and as long as we get through the debt ceiling, where there doesn't seem to be any progress on that right now, but hopefully we do get through that, and if we do, then I think things will work out okay. But going on these shows and it's a skill to get your points in sound bites. when you don't have that long form of, even this, I consider it like a long form, but when you don't have like a podcast or something that goes on for an hour or an hour and a half, when you could really get a deep dive into it. And those formats, it's interesting because those formats are really starting to take over, but at the same time, the very short formats, like if you look at applications like TikTok and Instagram stories, the short formats are taking over too. I can't do it, I can't do it in 15 seconds. You know, I've tried, and once in a while I'll put things out for 15 seconds, but I need to talk. Anyway, I wouldn't panic about anything. We do have the April tax trains coming up in another couple of weeks. We could see market volatility. Of course, that'll all be blamed on whatever, interest rate hikes or QT or the banking situation or you name it. But it's just a quarterly recurrence that has an effect because it drains the economy of financial balances for a period of time. Normally it takes about 6 weeks to recover from that, and then the market moves higher. And we've been in this state right now where actually last October the market bottomed out, then we rallied up, then we had the normal mid-month slowdown of spending flows. You can see that on the chart. The chart's on my report, MMT Trader, and that happens right around mid-month every month, and so you see the slowdown, but then it picks up again. But the main point is we are now in an environment or a situation where we see the deficit exceeding where it was last year, so that's positive. So that's a net injection of additional financial balances into the economy. That is positive. And again, as long as we get through the debt ceiling, that should be a good thing. So I wouldn't worry about it too much. Let's keep our eyes focused and not panic. You know, stay calm, let everybody else panic, and use knowledge, use understanding to know what is going on, and we're all going to be fine. All right, everybody, don't forget, go to my website, pitbulleconomics.com, sign up for a 30-day free trial of MMT Trader. See you tomorrow. Bye.